Okay, good evening. Tonight's Amud is Daf Zayin Amud Beis, Mesachos Berachos. Just quickly going to thank our sponsors. We begin by thanking all of our sponsors for the month of Mar Cheshvan. Give me 1 second to find it. Having here. We thank Stephen Terry Zinn for sponsoring all the shiurim this month in the loving memory of Steve's father, Albert Zinn, Barum Tzvi Ben Chaim on his 18th yahrzeit. We also thank Leah Sol for sponsoring all the shiurim as Zechus for Shlema for her daughter, Ilana Bas Esther, for all those wounded in Eretz Yisrael. We also thank Yonasan and Rachel Wolf for sponsoring all the shiurim for a complete and lasting refuah for Rafael Yitzchak Baruch Ben Esther. We thank Jerry and Sarah Wolaski for sponsoring all the shurim as a schos for Shlema for Zachariah Dov Ben Paral Shira. And we thank and Iris Miller for sponsoring all the shurim for the schos for the holy soldiers of the IDF and all those in Eretz Yisrael. And the schos for Talmud Torah. All the cholam should have a Shlema. The Shama should have an Aliyah, and all those in Yeshua should have Yeshua Keharifying. We begin all the way at the top, literally the first word on Daf Zayin and Beis, 7b in Mesachos Berachos. The Gemara is going to go through a number of statements by Rabbi Yochanan in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Miyom Shebara HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sa'olam, from the day that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, Lo Haya Adam Shekar O LaKadosh Baruch Hu Adon. No one referred to HaKadosh Baruch Hu as an Adam, as a master. That's the way that we typically refer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu now. Every time we make a blessing, every time we make a bracha, we always say a Baruch Atah, and the name that we use is the lashon of Adon, of a master. So no one used that name, Ad Sheba Avraham, until Avraham came along. Vikaro Adon called HaKadosh Baruch Hu as Adon, my master. Shnever, for it says, Vayomer Hashem Elokim, we pronounce this Hashem Elokim, but the language in the pasuk is the lashon of Adonos, of Adon Nai, and then it is Bama Eda Ki Roshena. How do I know? This is last week's parsha. How do I know that ultimately my children will inherit and ultimately take the land of Eretz Yisrael? So that was part of the Bris Ben Abisarim. It happens to be that line was a line that Avraham Avinu paid a heavy price for. It wasn't a line he was supposed to ask. But in the line that he actually used, he used the lashon of Adnos, referring to Kadosh Baruch Hu as a master. The Gemara continues, Amar Rav said, Af Daniel lo nena el b'shvil Avram. When Daniel, the Gov Haroyos, when he was faced with the lions, he was answered because of Ram Avinu Shnever, for it says, Ve'ata, and now Shema Elokeinu, listen, my Lord, El Tfilas Avdecha, El Tachanun of Harpanecha, Makdashcha Hashameim, Leman, and again use the word of Hashem, which is in the language of Adnos. This we say this on Mondays and Thursdays in Tachnun. Leman Hashem, and again it's the terminology of Adon. Leman Cha Mibai, should say because of you. Mibayle. El Leman Avram, Shekar Adon, because of Avram, we refer to you as a master. That's why he was saved. The Gemara continues at the two dots. Vam Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Ben Yochai. Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of Mishum Ben Yochai, Minayit She'im Ratzon Al Adam Shas Kaso. We mentioned this line in the Gemara yesterday already. How do you know that it is not appropriate for a person to try to calm someone down when he's very angry? Shnemer, for it says, Pani Elecha Ben Nichos Yilach. We mentioned the exact Gemara yesterday. My face ultimately will go away. I'll calm down when Nichos Yilach. And then ultimately we'll have that interaction. But again, a person should not try to calm someone down when they are angry. Gemara continues. Rabbi Yochanan mentioned in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Miyom Shek Baruch Kadosh Baruch Hu Solamo, from the day that Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world. Lo Haya Adam Shahoda La Kadosh Baruch Hu Ad Shebasa Leah V'Odaso. No one actually gave proper thanks to Kadosh Baruch Hu until Leah came around. Never, for it says Apam, this time Odas Hashem is going to give thanks to Hashem. This is a very famous line. There are some people who were thankful in advance, but the Rashi pointed out, the other Rishonim point out, that this was a special type of thank you, an appreciation that was given for a person recognizing that they have more than they deserve. And the truth is, there's a lot to focus on this. Many times we just believe we deserve things, and Leah as well. Rashi explains, and Maharsha gets a little stuck on this, but Rashi explains that Leah, she understood from a prophecy. And the problem is that she was not counted as one of the female prophets, so therefore it's hard to understand how she was a prophet. But ultimately she understood from a prophecy that there were going to be 12 Shvatim, there were going to be 12 children born to Yaakov. Simple math would say that if he has 4 wives who are giving birth to these children, If you're going to divide it evenly, everyone will have 3. So when she had her 4th child, which was Yehuda, she recognized that she's going to be one of the women who will have more children. Therefore, she understood that she's getting more than she deserves. So the thanks that the Gemara is describing over here is when a person finally realizes that the things that I have in my life, I'm getting them because they are gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not because I deserve them. It's so easy for people to take for granted certain things that we have. A person could simply say that the process of having children is natural, and there's a biological explanation of how a child is conceived, and therefore the children that a person has, they could say, you know what, I deserve this. This is just part of human life. The recognition that it's not a given, the recognition that a lot of the things in life actually are real gifts from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is what elicited her to be able to give that thanks. So that's what the Gemara is talking about, the first person to give such a proper and overwhelming thank you, recognizing that the gifts that I have in my life are indeed gifts. The first person we find to say that was Leah. The Gemara continues. Reuven, the name of Reuven, where did that come from? Amar, Rabbi Elazar says, Amar Leah. Leah said, Re'u ma bein beni lebein chami. Let's see what is between me and the son of my chami. This is referring to my father-in-law. So who is that? The son of her father-in-law was Esav. When it comes to Esav, he sold his firstborn rights. He sold the birthright to Yaakov willingly. He sold his birthright to Yaakov. What does it say? Vayistom Esav es Yaakov. He ultimately hated him because of that. You're calling him Yaakov. He sideswiped me twice. The ilu beni, my own son, afagav dal karchi shakle, my own son Ruvain, who lost his bechori, he lost the firstborn rights, and who took it? Yosef. Afagav dal karchi shakle Yosef bechurusei. Even though against his will, the firstborn rights were taken away, and it was given to Yosef, minei, from him, T'chsiv u'bechal yitzui aviv, nasn b'chorasa l'bnei Yosef, the bechora, the birthright was given to the sons of Yosef, to Ephraim and Menashe, filohachi, lo akanabe, he was not jealous of him, T'chsiv, v'yishma Ruvain v'yatzilel miyadam, Ruvain heard what happened when it was going on with Yosef, and he saved him from them. So again, I just want to focus on this for a minute. This is also a strange story because the story hasn't happened yet. So again, we're talking about somebody who is talking about naming her child Reuven. Why was he called Reuven? Because of a story that was going to later happen with Reuven and Yosef. The story hasn't happened yet. So again, the Gemara seems to indicate that there is nevuah, this prophecy to Leah. But again, the Maharsha has the same problem, that we don't find that Leah was a prophet. Now, the way the Maharsha explains this is, it really comes back to the concept of parents. Parents, when they give their child a name, are given a certain divine intuition to what that child's name is. And that divine intuition, it's an experience that a parent has when they choose the name, and later in life, there are many incidents that actually match that person's name. Their personality, their experiences will match that name. When the Maharsha is saying she was speaking, she understood something was happening, but she didn't necessarily know the story, but in hindsight, this is what she was able to understand from that name. The interesting thing, which is more interesting, is that the Pasuk tells us a different reason why his name was Reuven. But ultimately, when it comes to prophecy, there could be many reasons why a person will be able to have a certain experience. So therefore, the Gemara over here is giving another explanation. The pasuk says, "Because ki ra Hashem ba'ani, Hashem saw my pain." Over here, it says that the Reuven was given for another reason because she saw the difference between her son and her brother-in-law. The Gemara goes on and says, "Rus." Rus. Why was she called Rus? Which again is interesting. Rus was not called Rus by anybody really very holy. She was Rus before she was even Jewish. The Gemara still says, why was she called Rus? My Rus, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Shezachsa, she ultimately merited V'yatz mimena David. David came out of her. Sheyiruhu lakadosh baruch hu v'shiros v'sishbachos. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a plentiful, an elevated experience of songs and praise. So what does Rus? Rus means that it comes from Sheyirveyo. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, there was plenty, there was a lot. You could also add on Shiros. Shirus. I don't think that's what the Gemara means, but it comes from Yirveyo that there were plenty of Shiros and Shishpachos. Gemara says, "Minala de shma garam." How do you even know that a person's name actually has an effect? Rabbi Elazar, the second wide line, Elazar says, "Damar kra l'chu chazum mifalos Hashem." Look at the actions of Hashem Asher Sam Shamos. So Shamos generally refers to some kind of destruction. Shamos ba'aretz. Al tikri Shamos ela Shemos. We're understanding the Shemos, the names that people have an effect on them. The Gemara continues. Kasha tarbas rabas ochbeso. When there's rebellion within one's house, chas v'shalom, tarbas rabas ochbeso shaladam yosim melchamas Gog u'Magog. The melchama of Gog u'Magog, we know, is a war which is terribly difficult to deal with. Nevertheless, the Gemara says it is worse for a person who experiences their own personal rebellion going on in their home. A person's child rebels against them, it is worse than the experience of Gog u'Magog. Shemar, for it says, Mizmor LeDavid. One of the Mizmorim, the Shiros, the songs of David was, B'varcho b'pnei Avshalom beno. His own son, Avshalom, rebelled against him, and this Mizmor, this parak of Tehillim, he wrote when he was escaping his son. Uchsev, Basrei, it says afterwards, in the next parak of Tehillim, Hashem ma rabu tsarai, rabim kamalai, v'ilu gabim mechamas Gog u'Magog. So his expression in that parak of Tehillim, not the next parak, in that parak of Tehillim, when he's talking about running away from his son, he talks about how difficult the pain was. Imagine a father has to escape his son's wrath. It's something which is, it's just not comprehensible. Who can understand such a thing like that? David HaMelech is running away from his son, and he talks about the terrible pain that he has. His son is rebelling against him. When he was writing about Melchamas Gog u'Magog, Ksiv Lama Ragshu Goyim Umu Yego Rik, which describes why will the nations have all the nations of the world have all these feelings, and they're going to be filled with emptiness. He doesn't lament the fact that he's going through so much pain. So you see, when David talks about his personal pain that he was going through, when he was describing the pain that he had running away from his son, that was so much more intense than the pain that he was talking about that will come through the Melchama, the war of Gog u'Magog. Gemara continues after the 2,000. Gemara says, Mizmar LeDavid, B'varchu b'pnei Avshalom beno. Is there a song, a zemer? David HaMelech was singing a song when he was running away from his son. Mizmar LeDavid, Kina LeDavid mibayalei. How could he call this a song? It should be a lamentation. It should be part of the kinnis that he's writing on Tisha B'Av. How could you have such a lamentation like this called a song? The Gemara says, Amr Shimon ben Avishalom. Shimon ben Avishalom says, Mashal Ma'adav. What is it similar to? L'adam sheyatza lo shtar chov. The person to whom a shtar chov, he has a bill or a major contract or maybe some type of legal problem the person finds himself in. He finds himself to be indicted in some type of crime. Kodem shaparo, before he has the opportunity to pay it off. Haya atzev, it's such a huge weight sitting on his shoulder. I know I owe the money. I don't have the weight. I don't have the ability to pay it back. When I know something's coming my way, a person doesn't know what's coming. It's tremendously agonizing for a person to go through such an experience. La'achar shaparo, once a person finishes paying off the chov, he pays the debt or he serves the sentence, sameach, there's a certain sense of relief knowing that he's able to pay it off. The Gemara says, Af Kain David, the same is true with David. Kiwun Shem LaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hineni Mekim Alecha Ra Mi Beischa. Kadosh Baruch Hu told David, you're going to have some difficulties within your home. Haya Atzev, he was very sad. Amar, he said, Shema Edo Mamzerhu. Maybe this is going to be a stranger. Maybe maybe one of my servants. Maybe some type of other mamzer is going to come cause me all this pain. Delo Chayis Alai. This is a person who doesn't care about me, doesn't love me, doesn't want to help me. The person will have absolutely no rachmanis, no compassion on me, and the pain is going to be even worse. Kivin the Chazid Avshalom, who once he saw that the child, the person who was rebelling against him was his own child, he thought Shema Sameach, he was happy, Shemhachi Amar Mizmar, because ultimately he saw that it was his son, he said Mizmar. Now this is very difficult to understand. How could a person understand that he feels relieved that it's his son? So this bothered me when I learned this Gemara today. I looked in the Maharsha. The Maharsha says that the reason why he was happy is because he couldn't fathom that his son would not have Rachmanis on him. The truth is, he didn't. Avshalom had no Rachmanis whatsoever on David. He was not compassionate at all, and he treated him terribly. But he always thought, as he was going through the pain, to think, this is my son. How bad could he be already? He's my son. It was so painful for him to deal that experience of having a son rebel against him, but always in the back of his mind, he had this thought, okay, it can't be so bad. It's my son. He won't be that bad. So therefore, he was able to say Mizmar. Rabbi Yochanan continues, person's allowed to taunt evil people in this world. For it says in the pasuk, Ozvei Torah Yihalu Rasha, V'shomrei Torah Yizgaru Bam. So those who ultimately abandon the Torah, those who are evil, and they ultimately are the Halalu Rasha. The Rishayim will praise them. Shomer Torah Yizgaru Bam. Those who keep the Torah will ultimately taunt them. Tani Nami Hachi, the Gemara continues and says, Rav Distay Bar Matan Omer Mutu L'Skaros B'Shom B'Mazeh. Person's allowed to taunt Rishayim in this world. Never, for it says Oz V'Torah Halalu Rasha, and it goes on to say the same pasuk, and it goes on to say V'Im Lachsha. If a person's going to say, hold on, there's another pasuk in the Torah. It says, "Al tischar b'merayim." Person should not fight with people who are merayim, ultimately evil people. And it also says, "Al tekani b'osi avla." A person should not be mekani. A person should not be the one to lecture or to get involved with osi avla, people who do wrong things. So Amar Lo, I will say to him, Misha Libo Nokvo. It depends. If you're the kind of person who's resistant, now you're reluctant to do it. Why would a person be reluctant? Rashi explains this is similar to a person who doesn't want to go out to war. And the reason he doesn't want to go out to war is Mishum. It's Ish Hayari Varach Alevav. Person who's weak-hearted because he recognizes he has a lot of averos, and he says, "Who am I? Who am I to go out and go to war? Which chosim do I have to carry with me?" So the same type of person should not be someone to poke or to taunt Rishayim. Omar, Mishaliba Nokfa, Omar Kane. Someone who is not confident, that person says that. Ela altischa b'mreim, lios b'mreim. What does it mean? Altischa b'mreim, it means don't be friends with them. Or altikani bosi avla, don't, when the pasuk says don't get involved in them, what that was talking about was someone who is going to become friends with them. Or altikani bosi avla, lios bosi avla. Don't be like the people who do wrong. V'yomar says in the pasuk, al yikane libcha bechatom ki'im b'yiras Hashem kol hayom. The pasuk says a person should not ultimately yikani libcha, allow his heart to become jealous. Bechatoyim kiim b'yiras Hashem kol hayom. Person should ultimately be busy with yiras Hashem, with fear of God. Any of the pasuk says, hold on. Rabbi says in Rasha Shashad Mesechekes. If you see a Rasha that he's ultimately having a difficult time, things are going bad for him, out this garabo, don't poke him, don't taunt him. Shnever says person should always be compassionate. Rather, and in addition to that, it says in the pasuk, Maro mishpatachim inegdo, v'lo el sharo b'tzarav, v'lo el sharo b'tzarav. He'll see his pain. Shnemer kol tzarav yafiach b'hem. Gemara says we have these contradictory psukim. How a person should treat a rasha who's ultimately suffering. Should a person taunt them or not? Gemara says lo kasha. It depends. Haba milid yidei, haba milid dishmaya. If you're talking about personal matters, there's really no place in the world for a person to start taunting a rasha for personal matters. You have some personal beef with somebody, as they call it. That's not a place to start being all righteous. You're a rasha. Look, this is going on to you. That's never appropriate for a person to start taunting a rasha b'olam hazeh. However, the mili d'shmaya, if a person is speaking on behalf of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, a person goes ahead and does things which are disgraceful to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and then you see the person's having a hard time, perhaps at that point in time, a person could say, listen, this is not my issue. This is an issue of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, then it would be appropriate. The Gemara says, if you want, you can make another suggestion. Of course, everyone says, we never had any hava mina to say that we were talking about a case where a person was dealing with personal matters. Of course, it's talking about divine issues. L'kasha, it's not a steer. The psukim, which have different indications, are not a kasha. Hava rasha shasham esachekos lo, rasha shema sham esachekos lo. Depends what the rasha is going through. In other words, if he's going through a difficult time, it's one thing. If he's not going through a difficult time, so then you have to be very careful. Like Gemara says, others would suggest, or an alternative explanation is hava rasha shasham meshechekes lo. It's both of them is talking about when a rasha is going through a difficult time. Lo kasha ha b'tzadik gamor, ha b'tzadik she'eno gamor. It depends who you are. You got to be careful. You want to go ahead and taunt somebody else because of his rishus. You have to make sure that you yourself are a tzaddik. If you're a perfect tzaddik, all right, no problem. But if you aren't, then maybe stay away. Damar of Huna says, "Ma'idachsiv." What does it say? The pasuk, "Lama tabit bogdim tachesh bevala rasha tzaddik bimenu v'chi rasha bolei tzaddik." The pasuk seems to say the tachesh bevala rasha tzaddik bimenu. That the tzaddik will ultimately swallow someone who is more righteous than him. The Gemara asks, how could it be that a rasha will swallow a tzaddik? Rasha b'leh, a tzaddik and a rasha actually swallow a tzaddik. Hashem lo yazvenu b'yado. Hashem will never abandon a tzaddik. It also says, "Lo yu'una l'tzadik kolaven." The tzaddik will not be pained by any of these sins. The Gemara says, "El tzaddik b'menu." It means someone who's just more righteous than him. Bolei tzaddik who's just a little bit more righteous, but not an actual complete tzaddik. That person could be swallowed by a rasha. Tzaddik gamar, eina bolei, an actual perfect tzaddik can never be attacked by a rasha. So therefore, if a person is a tzaddik gamar, he doesn't have to worry about taunting Rishayim. What's going to happen to him already? What's the rasha going to do? Rasha can't get back. There's no retribution. It's possible. He's a tzaddik gamar, but if he's not a perfect tzaddik, which I think most of us fit into that category, at least I fit into that category. I hope I'm at least a little bit of a tzaddik, but that's not appropriate for anybody who is not a tzaddik gamar to actually be taunting Rishayim. Shani, again, it depends. It goes back to that answer. That it really depends what the rasha is going through. It depends whether or not he's having a hard time. For Amar Rabbi Yochanan, the Gemara continues. About 7 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. So he also another line from Yochanan in the name of Shimon ben Yochai called Kovei Makom L'Tfilaso. Going back to what we mentioned yesterday, if a person establishes a permanent place to daven, Oivav Noflim Tachtav, his enemies are going to fall from underneath him. Shnei, for it says in the pasuk, V'santi Makom L'Am Yisrael Unitativ. V'shochin Tachtav V'lo Yirgaz. So ultimately, V'lo Yirgaz, they will not be punished, they won't be destroyed, there won't be any anger over there. So again, that's dependent on V'samti Makom L'Ami, that you'll make a permanent place. V'lo Yusifu b'nei Avil Anoso, people won't be able to. V'lo Yusifu b'nei Avil Anoso, people will not be able to paint him. So again, we see if a person's koveya a makom for tefillah, that you won't be able to paint him kasher b'rishona. Rav Huna Rami. Rav Huna asked the contradiction. Ksiv la'anoso. It says that you won't be able to paint him. Ksiv la'chaloso. They won't be able to destroy him. So which one is it? More says b'tchila la'anoso. First he tried to paint him. Sof la'chaloso. Ultimately he tried to destroy him. The Gemara goes on and says another statement from Yochanan Mishum ben Yochai. Gedola shimusha shatar yosmin muda. A person serving or being mishamesh, being available to help out a Talmud Chacham is better than it's more important than learning Torah. Therefore it says in the pasuk, Po Elisha ben Shafat asher yotzak mayim aidei Eliyahu. Here is Elisha ben Shafat. He poured water on the hands of Eliyahu Hanavi. Lamad, it teaches us lo nemar ella. Lamad lo nemar doesn't say that he learned from Eliyahu Hanavi. It says he served Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyatzak, we learn from this that it is better for a person to serve a Talmud Chacham than to actually learn from him. Gemara, there's 2 understandings. The simple understanding is that he washed his hands. The other understanding, which is the way that most understand this, is shimush doesn't simply mean that you're pouring him, washing his hands or bringing him a glass of tea. It means that a person spends a tremendous amount of time with a Talmud Chacham, so he learns from that he learns the halacha lamaisa. There's so many things that we learn, which Marsha writes this very clearly. There are certain things that are halacha v'lo lamaisa. They are halacha, but practically speaking, they're not going to be relevant because of the various scenarios that come to play. And a person needs to know how to apply the various different halachas to life. There are some halachas that just because of the scenario, they aren't relevant. They aren't the proper halacha for that scene. How does a person learn that? A person learns it from doing shimush. And indeed, most yeshivas that give smicha encourage their talmidim before they actually take jobs in rabbanos to spend some time being mishamash another rav, to see how that rav answers questions, to see how it is that they take the academic side of the learning and they apply it to the practical side of learning. It's like this: when someone calls up with a shayla, you aren't just quoting pieces of a shach and a taz, which are all true, but you understand what a practical kitchen is going to look like, what it means for somebody to ask the question, what they mean when they ask the question, how they receive an answer, and how to practically give guidance. And it's a tremendous part of learning. It's, of course, a person can't do shimush talmid chachamim without learning. It's a prerequisite to learn, to know the basics. But the practical side of hara has to come from shimush. We'll stop here, even though we're 3 lines up from the bottom. First of all, Rabbi Silber left me a lot more, so he could have 3 lines on the bottom. Number 2, because this Gemara actually continues all the way up to the next Amud, so it's one discussion. It was covered and an honor to be able to learn with you this week. I believe Rabbi Silber should be back any minute, and Mitzvah Hashem next week he'll continue. Have a good night and a good Shabbos.